Okay, so happy birthday, Ralph Adams Cram. He was born in 1863 in the United States and died in 1942. Let's read a little bit about him. So he was born, as I said, on December 16th, 1863. Ralph Adams Cram was a prolific and influential American architect of collegiate and ecclesiastical buildings, often in the Gothic revival style. Cram and Ferguson and Cram, Goodhue and Ferguson are partnerships in which he worked. Together with the architect Richard Upjohn and artist John Lafarge, he is honored on December 16th, so on this day, as a feast day in the Episcopal Church of the United States. Cram was a fellow of the American Institute of Architects, but I should add, he was a self-educated architect, just like Le Corbusier, Tadao Ando, and many other famous architects. This was the man. I mean, we don't yet see his face, but we will, a very serious man. He even wrote, apparently, novels, you know, Gothic or Gothicist novels. Complicated man, I feel, and I'm rather curious about him, because you would say he's a man of God, but he wrote actually, at least in his literature works, about evil. So anyway, but a very good architect, and he was even commissioned to continue the works on the largest cathedral in the world, and that is St. John the Divine in New York City, which to this day is not truly finalized, but then no cathedral ever is actually truly finalized. He made it also to the cover page of Time magazine, the weekly news magazine, and I hope one day we'll have a Romanian here, a lady or a gentleman representing the architecture of our country, if possible. I think it is possible, but we have to have higher ambitions and to, yes, to be in the forefront of architecture, which now it cannot happen with the T-square and the rectangle. It's just not possible. Look what he said, and this is actually very, very true in my opinion, and very, very forgotten, or not known, or not acknowledged. So this is what Ralph Adams Cram said: but freedom, liberty, is an attribute of the soul, and it may exist even when the body is in bondage. This is something which, for example, Daniel Lipskind doesn't seem to understand or to acknowledge, because he made a proposal for depicting, you know, the effects of COVID, the effects of the pandemic by, you know, entrapping the Statue of Liberty, you know, symbolizing the apparent lack of freedom that humans have because of the pandemic, because they cannot move so much. But this man, in a profound way, I would say, here he states that freedom is an attribute of the soul, not of the legs. It doesn't have anything to do with physical movement. In fact, the yogi, any Indian yogi, in order to achieve spiritual freedom, immobilizes himself completely. So I think we should reflect on this. Maybe the pandemic is suggesting to us to attempt to achieve a different kind of freedom, not taking the car and you know, running wildly on the highway, but on the internalization of our feelings, of our thoughts, and in the solitude of our rooms, we can achieve a different kind of freedom, the freedom of the soul, the freedom of the spirit. Are we thinking about that freedom? And I think Cram is right. Freedom or liberty is an attribute of the soul, not of the body necessarily. Because I think he's right. It may exist even when the body is in bondage. In other words, it's not moving, it's immobilized. And this is in a way what the yogi does, who achieves enlightenment, meaning, spiritual freedom by not moving. And the posture in meditation requires that you don't, agitate yourself on the highway. Quite the opposite. You adopt a static position. Here is a little difficult to read. I'll try because my eyeglasses are not good. But I found this picture, and sorry for the resolution. Theology in stone. The assemblage of all the arts, music, poetry, drama, liturgy, in this vast work built up from each, raised to the highest level and all fused in architecture, is the greatest artistic achievement. And interestingly, this statement that he made, and I hope I read it correctly because I barely saw those little words, is almost identical with what Walter Gropius, the founder of the Bauhaus, said in the manifesto, in the Bauhaus manifesto that he wrote in 1919. It's about the conjunction of the arts, something we totally do not do these days. And we should do, but for some reason we don't. Anyway, let's look at some drawings. These are not, spectacular drawings, but I think his architecture is serious, is sensitive, and deserves recognition even in parts of the world where he's not known, like in our country. The parish of All Saints, we are going to see this building. Again, this presentation is an introduction to his work, and it could receive a growth, a development. He loved the Gothic, he loved the Middle Ages, and he actually said that European culture, the Renaissance in the European culture, was actually the wrong road, the wrong way. He felt that we should go back to the time before the Renaissance, and that is the Middle Ages. And interestingly, although I'm sure Frank Lloyd Wright and Ralph Adams Cram, maybe it's possible they disliked each other. I don't know, but in this they almost, it's not that they coincide. But Frank Lloyd Wright also wrote negatively vis-a-vis the Renaissance. Now, maybe there was also envy. I don't know. Wright was sometimes a capricious man, like all of us, actually. And he said that what truly matters is a birth, a naissance, not a renaissance. Yet, of course, we cannot contest, the achievements of the Renaissance. But on the other hand, we cannot contest the value of the Middle Ages, because truly those great cathedrals built by the Middle Ages during the medieval times are some of the greatest achievements, in a spiritual sense, in an architectonic sense, in an artistic sense. And an Indian art critic and theoretician of culture, Kumaraswamy, said that actually in the Middle Ages of Europe achieved for the last time something that was happening in a similar way in India or Southeast Asia or Asia. That is a collective work that expressed faith. And it's true, after the Middle Ages, this didn't happen any longer, on a consistent and large scale. Now we have in Barcelona, the city of Barcelona, continuing the work of Antoni Gaudí at Sagrada Familia, but it's rather an exception. I'm happy that exists that exception. So this is not, it is a rendering. I don't know if he did it himself. Anyway, He built many churches and cathedrals. I will only show some, and I will also show a few other works which are not, for sacred functions or reasons. This is a, I don't know what it is, an illustration or the cover of a book he wrote, and it has a, an intriguing and a little bit alarming title, The Dead Valley. And we are going to see another cover of a book he published. This one, you see again, this is the man who wrote, who built cathedrals and churches. And I believe he believed in God, but look at this cover, a book of ghost stories, black spirits, and white. But that and white is almost like an afterthought. Anyway, an interesting man, Ralph Adams Cram. Now let's look at some of his buildings. Richmond Court. This is a housing complex in Brookline, Massachusetts. So built in 1896, 130 years ago or so, and still standing, and probably it's an enjoyable place to live in. Now, the Watkins Manor house from from Winona, Minnesota, 1924, 1927. Let's recall that Le Corbusier built Villa Savoie in 1928. So this was, the work was finalized 1 year before on Villa Savoie. And it's, nothing could be more different. But if you ask me, and I love the avant-garde and I love the new, but I don't dislike this building. I would actually love to live in such a building. Sorry if I could be accused of betraying modernity. I love modernity, but I also like what I see here. I mean, can you imagine, having this as a living room, and it's not a bad building. Okay, maybe it's not, very revolutionary. It's not, but I still think it's a good building. And look at the craft, the way the bricks are used. Now this stair is new, of course. This does. But I welcome it with its, functionalist modernity. It's fine. It's a good building, built by this man who never studied architecture formally, self-educated. But then even Palladio, in a way, was self-educated, because he went to Rome and he measured the temples there in the Forum by himself. There was no course of a certain school that sent him there. And there are many, of course, countless architects who, actually some of the greatest. And this is maybe a subject worth reflecting on. Why is it that some of the greatest architects never had a formal training? What's wrong with this building? It's a good building which could have been built also in Great Britain, in Victorian England. No, it's true. This thing is a little bit threatening here, kind of massive and big and tall, but let's hope it will not fall on the poor roof. But the building has qualities. I repeat. Now the Moonstone Cottage, 559 York Street in York Harbor. This is a villa, a house. There were other buildings built kind of in a similar way, but this is by an architect most people don't know of. And I think it's a little bit unfair, because he was a good architect. Ralph Adams Cram. Now we arrive at his ecclesiastical work. And I begin with this All Saints Church in Ashmont, Massachusetts from 1892. He loved to work with stone, and stone is, rather appropriate for, the meanings of relating to eternity, permanence, that a church should evoke, not to speak about the endurance of a building made of stone. But even this building, I think, okay, the architectural language is not revolutionary, but it's a building you can trust. Let's put it this way. The interior is kind of what we expect, but even the interior, although he is considered a medievalist, he's also considered modern. And at the end, I will show a work he did for Rice University in Houston, which is considered, and it's a secular building. Of course, it's not a religious building. It's considered by some the equal of some buildings by Frank Lloyd Wright, which is very well known as opposed to Cram. So in a way, this is about the other side of America. And although America can be very conventional and conformist and puritanistic, strangely, perhaps, an architect like him is not, it's almost forgotten, at least in the big cities. Now, the Christ Church in Hyde Park, Massachusetts, 1892, another church built of stone. I think there is a space to explore scholastically and productively through new works in the Middle Ages. All too often we only refer to the Renaissance as if, European history started, in Greece, and from Greece it jumped into Florence during Renaissance, and as if there was nothing in between. But, Romanic or Romanesque architecture can be splendid and very interesting and intriguing even. And so the Gothic architecture. But if we visit other countries and even within the country that we are in, small medieval towns are very charming. This is also something we should reflect on. Why is it that medieval towns are so charming as, in opposition to the modern cities or towns, which are so rigid and cold? Perhaps we can inspire ourselves from the Middle Ages more than we do. The Phillips Church in Exeter, New Hampshire, 1897. Here, in Exeter, there is also, and I hope it's the same place, it should be, where is a famous university, is also the Exeter Library by Louis Kahn, one of his best works, I think. Anyway, this is a church by Ralph Adams Cram, built there. Now, the Cathedral Church of St. Paul in Detroit, 1908. Now, this is this is not a work to ignore. Okay, he worked using historical or historicist models. It's true, but I think this is well absorbed, that history is absorbed and used, I would say convincingly. This is a vigorous architectural work. And it does have, to an extent, a certain modernity if we contemplate its vigor, its verve almost. It's a solid work, it's a sculptural work, it does have value. It's not finalized because it doesn't have the spire here, and some of his works don't. Maybe they ran out of money, or I don't know. But even like this, I think it's not a work to be dismissed or neglected or forgotten. The United States built many churches. Curiously, perhaps paradoxically, this most pragmatic and mercantile country in the world, as Andrei Codrescu, a Romanian poet who lives now in the United States, said, is also the most spiritual. Although here maybe I would have some, I'd be a little bit more reticent. But if we judge a country, based on how many churches they built, it's possible the United States has the largest number in the world. I mean, where I lived myself in Brooklyn, New York, there were 4 churches at one intersection on the street I lived in. In each corner, there was a little church, not big works, although skillfully done, small churches. And I read, and I still don't believe it, and I didn't verify, and I don't even know if I can verify, but I read that Brooklyn alone has 11,000 churches, if you can believe it. That's what I read. I didn't verify, and I'm tempted to doubt it. But if it is true, it is unbelievable. 11,000 churches just in Brooklyn. Forget about Manhattan, Queens, Bronx, and all the rest. And this just in one city. So look at this work. This is a good work by Ralph Adams Cram. He had 2 partners. He worked with 2 partners. Actually, one of them became himself very significant, and I hope I will have the occasion to talk about him. They split. He worked in New York, while Ralph Adams Cram worked in Boston. The Church of the Covenant in the University Circle neighborhood of Cleveland, Ohio, 1911. Another, at least dignified building. He found inspiration in the Middle Ages of England mostly, I read, and I will arrive at the text that is included in the presentation about the source of inspiration. But look at the interior; it has a certain complexity. Okay, it's not, as I said, revolutionary, but I think no one can contest the seriousness and the sensitivity of this work. Ralph Adams Cram. Now, St. Paul's Episcopal Church in Winston-Salem, another work that, it doesn't have the spire, but even like this has a control monumentality, which is genuine. Now we arrive, although I should have had more images with the work, but I guess I couldn't find them for now in Cleveland. But now we arrive at the, well, from what I read, the biggest cathedral in the world, the Cathedral of St. John the Divine in New York City. The design was taken over by Ralph Adams Cram in 1911. So the cathedral was begun by someone else or some other team earlier, and he took over in 1911. I don't know exactly what he did here, but I'll show images of this cathedral where even Santiago Calatrava made a proposal for, and I'm going to show some images relating to his work. It was not done yet, but Calatrava made a proposal. I saw 2 schemes, so to speak, for this part of the building. I don't know if Ralph Adams Cram proposed first this or this. There are 2 alternatives, and then this happens. Architects know this. You make various proposals, and particularly for such an important part of a cathedral, forget about being the largest cathedral in the world. I'm sure many studies and many schemes were proposed. This is the elevation of the building, unfinished as it is, but I think in a way a cathedral, by its very essence, its very nature, is not supposed to be finalized truly, because it's an aspiration. It's a longing for God, and you grow towards God in a certain way. But this work is never finished. It's never finalized, and it shouldn't, I think. And so even as a fragment, if we can call this a fragment, I think is convincing. And in this case, even more so because of the scale. I mean, look at the human beings here at the bottom. It's a large building, and that's what I read, the largest cathedral in the world. Maybe at the time when it was built, appropriately so, being in New York City. Now, is what we look at worse than Notre Dame de Paris? Well, in one respect, at least, I like this more because it's darker. It's not cleaned up like they cleaned up Notre Dame de Paris for the tourists to take pretty pictures. At least and I situate myself in opposition with Le Corbusier, who wrote a book about Quand les cathédrales étaient blanches, when the cathedrals were white. Personally, I think the cathedrals were never white, because the stone itself is not really white. I mean, you can find some white stones, but they are not so common as the gray ones. So in my opinion, cathedrals were always, at least, partially gray, not white. It was more like a dream, a wishful thinking, I think, on the side of Le Corbusier. I like this facade. It's okay. It's not a very original building, but I think it has the power to provoke emotions, and not just because of the size. It's well proportioned. It has a certain level of complexity, and the interior as well. And in this picture, I don't know how it is now. I had been in this cathedral, but at that time there were chairs. But you see, the cathedrals were not meant actually to have chairs or benches. Because indeed, how could you sit down in front of God? This is the house of God. So I think any cathedral looks better. It's more impressive when it doesn't have chairs and when it doesn't have benches, like in this picture. You see here, it's still a work in progress, so to speak. And even so, I think it has the ability to convey emotion. And it has a certain simplicity in complexity. The Gothic cathedrals from the 12th century, they were more elaborate than this one to an extent, although there was structural grace and even logic. Here we see a certain, even if it's a building that tries to not change too much in relation with the Middle Ages, it has a certain modernity because of the simplicity of the structural elements. I mean, look here, there is a modernist feeling about it, although the building is employing the language of the past, but it is transformed. There is a level of transformation here. Now we see a picture with the chairs, but even so, I think the space is very impressive. So built, 100 some years ago. It's not a very old cathedral, no, but I still think it has a level of authenticity. What exactly Ralph Adams Cram did, I do not know, but we could continue to investigate. Here is a picture from, I don't know, maybe 1950s or maybe even before the war. It's possible. The capital of capitalism, in a way, New York City, had also, as you see, an activity which was not related to making money, but to praying. The entrance doors. There was a large effort, of course, to build this building, even if it was not finalized. Or not even, approximately finalized. Now I want to show a few things about what Santiago Calatrava, he won a competition. From what I remember, there was some kind of a competition for an something having to do with ecology, connecting the cathedral with ecology. I remember reading, but unfortunately I couldn't refresh my memory about this. But I'll show you what he proposed. First, a sketch that Calatrava did for the St. John the Divine Cathedral in New York. And then I'll show, sorry for the resolution, but this is what I found. I think he has some interesting things here, which are, very much Calatrava. The spire, in my opinion, is not the correct one, if I can use this language, for this kind of building. No, and this is not what we saw. This is not what Ralph Adams Cram proposed. In my opinion, the spire is not matching the spirit of the building. But otherwise, what is happening here, I like the insertion of the new within the building. So Santiago Calatrava at St. John the Divine, a proposal which was not, he won the competition, but was not built, at least yet. And now we look at a secular work by Cram, Ralph Adams Cram, at Rice University in Houston, Texas. It's not an ecclesiastical work, it's not a work destined for religion, but for education. And he valued education very much. And apparently Houston, and not just Houston, valued this building, not just this building. He was responsible for the site plan and built a few buildings. But this is the most famous. I think it's the administration building. And I read that, he was inspired by Mediterranean architecture. I forgot exactly what it is, but it is transformed. It is, some even think that this could have been a Houston style of architecture. I don't know. I'm not very sure about this, but I don't think it's a building that is not at least pleasant. And this is a very famous university, one of the best 20 universities in the United States, Rice University in Texas. Now, you see, he was inspired by history. There is historicism in his architecture, but I think it is an assimilated, it is digested. It is a historicism which is convincing. It's not superficially, displayed here in a facile way. No, Cram was a serious architect, maybe too serious. Anyway, so this is Rice University in Texas, building done by Ralph Adams Cram, whose birthday is today. An architect who will perhaps talk again next year about. And now Cram, Goodhue, and Ferguson, these were his two partners. The Cadet Chapel at West Point Academy, the famous military academy in the United States. This is another good building. Look at it's a sculptural, vigorous, muscular work, but it's dedicated to God. It's a chapel. It's a chapel because this is happening in the United States. The military doesn't neglect the dialogue, the vertical dialogue, if we are to call it so, with God. And so they take their role seriously. Now let's hope they will never pick up their rifles, whatever other military machines, in order to you know, create a lot of disorders through war in the world. Let's hope that they do not so. But I think the fact that, you know, at West Point, such a building exists, and there are other examples. You know, there is a famous, anyway, I should not get into that. But the presence of this kind of architectural work on a military training campus like West Point is worth thinking about. And it's one of his best buildings, in my opinion. I like it's bigger, you know, it's this is a muscular architecture. Yes, inspired by the past, but I think it is, as I said, it can be trusted. This is an architecture one can trust. Imagine now military men sitting here on these chairs. I think the building is telling them without words to take life and death very seriously, to understand that they cannot perform their duties without dignity, although unfortunately that dignity sometimes is forgotten, and there are proofs from the war in Iraq and in some other examples. But you know, the misery of war takes a toll on everybody, and I'm not trying to excuse the military, the North American soldiers, but this kind of building with this kind of function is telling them to, you know, to respect life, and to know that there is something somehow beyond the humans. We cannot just do anything we want. I think I remember Dostoevsky saying that, you know, if God is dead, we can't even have a captain in the army. In other words, if there is no, if the supreme authority in the world at large is not there any longer, meaning God, then you can't even have the authority of a captain in the army. So I guess a chapel like this one, it's trying to communicate that you know, we cannot just do anything we want. There is some order in the world, and there should be some order in the world. I like this building. And now I'll show All Saints Church in Peterborough, a smaller church. But this one also, I think it has, as I use this word a few times, and I don't like to repeat myself, but I use it again. It has vigor, but it also has grace. I like this building, you know, it's and in its setting. And yes, there is a level of modernity. If we look at these blank walls here, you know, I think it's another good building by Ralph Adams Cram. What I don't know, dialogue here between the reddish tree in the fall and the grayish building, you know, the work of man, the work of God, in some kind of a dialectical relationship. He also worked with, I forgot his name, but I think I have a text here where the name of the artist is mentioned. All Saints Church in Peterborough is this work, which is in a way very, very different from St. John the Divine or the chapel at West Point. But even if it's small, I think it shows care, if not adoration, if not love. I hope I have here a text about relating to, I think, to this building. Yes, here. So let me read it. Cram is famous for his designs of churches, mostly Episcopalian, like All Saints. And All Saints is modeled after the St. Mary the Virgin Church in Iffley, Oxfordshire, England. The building is meant to convey the same grandeur of those English cathedrals, said this person. I extracted the text from a website. Someone was interviewed. interviewed that person, Hamilton, while at the same time lacking the intimidation factor that the grand structures can instill. So let's read it again. The building is meant to convey the same grandeur of those English cathedrals, while at the same time lacking the intimidation factor that the grand structures can instill. It's bold, but it's still small and intimate and has a nice invitation to it, said the same person. It is beautiful, but it is welcoming. And this is the last image of the presentation. I guess, I don't know, but I imagine that perhaps one of the tools employed, in the making of the church is, with affection displayed in this, box, if we are to call it so, inside the church. And this shows respect for the act of building. So let's wish again happy birthday to Ralph Adams Cram.